Get out of my house." Hank said it like he was reading a grocery list. No yelling, no drama. Just 4 words while I stood in the kitchen with a bandaged leg and dirt under my fingernails from trying to save my mama's peony bed. I didn't leave. And 3 weeks later, I found a green notebook buried in a tin box under the magnolia tree that explained everything. Not Hank's notebook, his daughter's. The one who brought zucchini bread and called me sis. Welcome back to my channel. There's a garden notebook sitting in my fireproof box right now, wedged between my mama's death certificate and the deed to this house. Green spiral cover, dirt on the edges, smudge of red Carolina clay on the back that I couldn't get off no matter how many times I wiped it. My mama's handwriting is on the front in that loopy script she used for everything important. My garden, my peace. She wrote it with a felt-tip pen, the kind she bought in packs of 4 from the craft section at Ingles Market because she said ballpoints had no personality. Nothing special to look at. Spiral-bound, college-ruled, bent at the corners from years of being carried outside in all weather. There's a dried petal pressed between pages 6 and 7, lavender, because of course it is. But if you flip that notebook over and start reading from the back cover in, the handwriting changes. Neat, careful, measured. Every letter sitting perfectly on the line like it showed up early and brought a ruler. And every word on those pages explains how one woman smiled in my face for 18 months while quietly trying to take my home, my family, and my sanity, all while bringing me zucchini bread and calling me sis. I found that notebook on a Saturday morning in my mama's garden, kneeling in the dirt beside the magnolia tree with a $4 trowel from Reams Creek Nursery and clay under every fingernail. But we'll get to the notebook. First, let me tell you about the night I went through the back porch screen door with glass in my hair and 8 fresh stitches in my leg. Now, I could sit here and tell you my whole life story, where I went to school, my credit score, my opinion on the craft brewery situation in downtown Asheville. But none of that matters half as much as what happened on a Tuesday evening in Biltmore Village when I was 30 years old, 4 hours out of the emergency room, and too exhausted to argue with anyone about anything. His name is Hank, by the way, Hank Presley. I call him Hank. Not Dad, not stepdad, not sir. He earned that. He married my mama, Gail, 5 years before she passed. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and vicious. The kind that doesn't negotiate and doesn't care how many peonies you planted or how much your daughter still needs you. And after she was gone, Hank turned into somebody I barely recognized. Or maybe he'd always been that somebody. Hard to say when the one person who made him tolerable isn't around anymore to sand down his edges. That Tuesday, I'd been at Blue Ridge Veterinary Partners, where I worked as a billing coordinator, which is a fancy way of saying I spent my days on the phone arguing with pet insurance companies about whether a golden retriever's torn cruciate ligament counts as a pre-existing condition. It does not, by the way. I will die on that hill. But that afternoon, a nervous pit bull mix named Biscuit had gotten spooked during a nail trim and caught my left calf with his teeth, deep enough for stitches. 8 of them. The emergency room bill came to $3,847, which is a fun number to stare at while sitting in a hospital gown that doesn't close properly in the back and never has in the history of hospital gowns. I signed the discharge papers, collected my little bag of gauze and wound care instructions, and drove home in my 2013 Subaru Outback, which had been threatening to quit on me for weeks. The check engine light was on permanently. Not blinking, not flickering, just on, steady and certain, like it had made a lifestyle choice. Dashboard looked like an arcade machine. Every warning lit up, none of them good. All I wanted in the world was a bowl of soup and my couch and maybe 12 hours of not thinking about money or dogs or medical bills. That was the entire list. Soup, couch, silence. Hank had other plans. He came through the front door around 7:45, still in his work boots, sawdust on his jeans, smelling like wood stain and the particular brand of exhaustion that comes from swinging a hammer in the Carolina heat all day. Hank was a carpenter. A good one, if you asked the people who hired him. A quiet one, if you asked anyone who lived with him. He didn't ask about the bandage on my leg. Didn't ask about the emergency room visit that I'd texted him about 4 hours earlier. Didn't even look at my calf, which was wrapped in enough gauze to gift wrap a small appliance. He walked into the kitchen, stood in front of the counter where I was heating up a can of tomato soup, the store brand from Ingles, because name brand was a luxury I'd stopped affording 3 months ago, and he put a piece of paper on the counter next to the stove. It was a quit-claim deed, 1 page, his name at the top, a line at the bottom for my signature. He told me to sign it, told me it would simplify things, told me the house was his and this was just paperwork to make it official, and I should stop dragging my feet and making everything harder than it needed to be. I told him I'd just gotten a $3,847 hospital bill. I told him my leg had 8 stitches in it and maybe we could talk about property documents next week when I wasn't actively leaking through gauze. He said I was making excuses. I said I was stating facts. He said I thought I was too good for this family, that I'd been squatting in his house rent-free since my mama died and I had some nerve acting like I owned the place. His house. That's what he called it. The house my mama planted hydrangeas in front of. The house where she hung wind chimes on the back porch because she said the sound reminded her of her own mother. The house she asked me to take care of 2 days before she died, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in her arms and a voice that had gone so thin I had to lean in to hear her. His house. I told him I wasn't signing anything tonight. I told him I was going to eat my soup now. And Hank Presley looked at me with the kind of quiet that's worse than yelling, the kind that settles behind someone's eyes right before something breaks. The soup was boiling over. I could hear it behind me, that thick bubbling sound tomato soup makes right before it spills, and I turned halfway toward the stove because that's what you do when something is about to make a mess. You try to stop it. I never got to the stove. Hank's hand hit the center of my chest. Not a slap, not a punch. A shove. Open palm. Full arm. The kind of push you'd use to move a piece of furniture that was in your way. And I was in his way. I went backward through the screen door of the back porch. Not the solid door. The screen one. The one with the aluminum frame that Mama had been asking Hank to replace for 2 years because the mesh was starting to pull away from the edges. Turns out she was right about the frame. It gave way like it was made of tinfoil. The glass panel next to it didn't give way. It shattered. I caught the edge of the frame with my shoulder on the way through, and then I was on the porch stones. Mama's garden stones. She'd laid them herself the spring before she got sick, these flat pieces of Pennsylvania bluestone she'd found at a landscape supply place on Sweeten Creek Road. She was so proud of those stones. Spent a whole weekend leveling them with a rubber mallet and a level she borrowed from Hank's workshop. And now I was lying on them with glass in my hair and my stitches torn open and the taste of blood in my mouth where I'd bitten my own tongue on the way down. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from biting your tongue hard enough to bleed. It radiates up through your jaw and into your temples and behind your eyes, and for a few seconds the entire world is just that one sharp note, like someone struck a tuning fork inside your skull. I could smell the magnolia tree, that sweet, heavy perfume that I'd loved my whole life, that Mama said smelled like heaven, was leaking through the fence. I was smelling it from the ground now, cheek pressed against bluestone that was still warm from the afternoon sun, and the smell mixed with the copper taste of blood and the sharp chemical scent of the wound care ointment they'd sent me home with 4 hours ago. The stitches on my calf had torn open on the left side. I could feel it before I saw it, that hot, wet, spreading feeling that means something that was closed is now open. My pajama pants, the flannel ones with the little dogs on them that Cassie had given me as a joke last Christmas, were soaking through at the knee. And the soup was still boiling over inside. I could hear it hissing on the burner through the broken door, and somewhere above me, Hank was saying something. I couldn't make out the words because my left ear was ringing from hitting the porch rail on the way down, but his voice had that flat, emptied-out quality it got after he'd done something he couldn't take back. All explosion, then nothing. Like a firecracker that pops once and leaves a smell. He stepped over me, walked to the front porch, sat down in the wooden rocker he'd built himself last summer, the one Mama used to sit in every evening to watch the hummingbirds come to the feeder. Just sat there, like nothing had happened. Like the screen door wasn't hanging off its hinges and his stepdaughter wasn't bleeding on the garden stones 10 feet away. Opal Hutchins, 68 years old, retired ceramic artist, lived next door for 22 years, and could hear a pin drop through 6 inches of drywall. The woman had ears that belonged on a surveillance satellite. She told me later she was on her back porch glazing a bowl, a celadon piece she'd been working on for a gallery show in Black Mountain, when she heard the sound of glass breaking and something heavy hitting stone. She said she knew what that sound was. 22 years of living next to people teaches you the difference between a dish breaking and a body falling. She called 911 before Hank even made it to the front porch. Officer Nguyen arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I was looking at my phone screen from the ground, the phone that had fallen out of my pocket and landed face up on the stones next to my head, and I watched the minutes change while I lay there, deciding whether it was worth trying to stand up. 7:56 when I hit the ground. 8:07 when the blue light started bouncing off the magnolia leaves. He walked around the side of the house because the front door was locked and Hank wasn't answering it, and he found me sitting up against the porch railing with my knees pulled to my chest and blood on my pajama pants and a piece of screen mesh stuck to my shoulder. I'd gotten myself upright somewhere around the 8-minute mark, pulled the glass out of my hair, tried to press my pajama leg against the open stitches, which was about as effective as putting a Band-Aid on a fire hydrant, but you do what you can with what you have. Officer Nguyen was maybe 30, calm in that trained way that means someone is actually very much not calm, but has learned to keep it behind their eyes. His partner was younger, couldn't have been more than 23. She stood at the corner of the house and didn't say anything for a solid 30 seconds. They found Hank on the front porch, rocking in Mama's chair. They put him in cuffs. He went quietly, which was the most Hank thing imaginable. All explosion, then nothing. All shove, then sit down. The man had the emotional arc of a bottle rocket. But as they walked him to the patrol car, Hank turned around. The porch light caught his face and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Not rage, not defiance. Something closer to confusion, like a man waking up in a room he didn't recognize. And he said something that didn't make any sense to me at the time. He said I should ask my sister what she showed him about me. My sister. I didn't have a sister. I had a stepsister. I had Darcy. And Darcy was already on her way over, because somebody, I'm guessing the neighbor 2 doors down who was standing on her lawn in a bathrobe watching the patrol car, must have called her. I heard the Kia Sorento before I saw it, the one with the cracked windshield she blamed on a rock on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Tires on gravel, then a car door, then footsteps, then Darcy Presley came around the corner of the house already crying. Crying before she even saw me. Before she saw the broken door or the blood or the glass on the stones. She was already performing. But I didn't know that word yet. Not then. Then I just thought she was my sister. And she was scared. And she loved me. And I was so tired and so hurt that when she wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "Oh my God, Ren, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he'd do this," I believed her the way you believe the ground will hold you up when you stand. Darcy Presley drove a Kia Sorento with a cracked windshield she blamed on a rock on the Blue Ridge Parkway. She was 32, 3 years older than me, worked as a social media manager for a boutique hotel on Haywood Street called the Laurel, and had the kind of face that made strangers trust her in grocery store checkout lines. People told her things. Personal things. Within 5 minutes of meeting Darcy, you'd find yourself explaining your divorce, or your medical results, or the fight you had with your mother last Thanksgiving, and she'd be nodding with those warm brown eyes, and you'd walk away thinking you just made the best friend of your life. She came through my broken porch door like a woman on a rescue mission, which I suppose she was, just not the kind I thought. She had a blanket in her hands before I could even finish telling her what happened, pulled it from the back seat of her car, one of those thick fleece throws with the little pills all over it from too many washes. She wrapped it around my shoulders and sat down on the garden stones next to me, right there on Mama's bluestone, and she didn't care about the blood or the glass or the fact that the ground was cold and damp from the sprinklers I'd run that morning. She found a bag of frozen peas in my freezer, the store brand because everything in my freezer was store brand. She pressed them against the side of my face so gently you'd have thought she was handling a hummingbird egg. One hand on the peas, one hand holding mine, and every time I paused while giving my statement to Officer Nguyen, Darcy squeezed my fingers. Not hard, just enough to say I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Officer Nguyen was thorough, I'll give him that. He photographed the broken door, the glass on the stones, the blood on my pajama pants, the torn stitches on my calf. He asked me to walk him through it twice, and both times Darcy sat beside me with the patience of a woman who had cleared her entire evening for this, which, looking back, she probably had. She probably cleared it the moment she got the call, because Darcy Presley never showed up anywhere unprepared. That was the thing about her. She didn't improvise. She rehearsed. But I didn't know that then. While Hank was being walked to the patrol car, while he was shouting that thing about asking my sister, Darcy rolled her eyes. Actually rolled them. The full rotation. The kind of eye roll that takes your whole head with it. And she said, "He does that. Every single time he gets cornered, he tries to turn people against each other. He did it to my mom during the divorce. He did it to his brother over the truck. It's his only move. Don't let him get in your head." That made sense. That sounded right. And I was sitting on the ground with blood drying on my chin and frozen peas melting against my cheekbone, and I didn't have the energy to question anything that sounded right. So I didn't. She drove me to the urgent care the next morning to get the stitches redone. Sat in the waiting room for 2 hours reading a magazine about container gardening that was 3 years out of date. Didn't complain. Didn't check the time. When I came out with fresh bandaging and a prescription for antibiotics that cost $64, she took me to the pharmacy drive-thru and then to a coffee shop on Biltmore Avenue where she bought me a lavender latte and told me I was the strongest woman she knew. I want you to hold on to that image for a minute. Darcy Presley sitting across from me in a coffee shop with foam on her upper lip, telling me I was strong while I held a latte with hands that were still shaking from the night before. Hold on to it because you're going to need it later, and it's going to taste different when you come back to it. This has nothing to do with the story. But Darcy made this zucchini bread that could have brokered peace between nations. I'm talking about the kind of zucchini bread that makes you close your eyes on the first bite. The kind where you eat one slice standing over the counter and then cut a second one before you've finished chewing the first, and you don't even feel guilty about it because bread that good exists outside the jurisdiction of guilt. She made it with brown butter and lemon zest and something else she wouldn't tell me, some secret ingredient she said her grandmother taught her. And she brought it over in a Tupperware container with her name written on the lid in black Sharpie, Darcy. Capital D with a little flourish on the tail, like she'd practiced her signature in middle school and never stopped. She brought it the morning after the assault, set it on my counter next to the discharge papers from urgent care and said, "You need to eat something real, not soup from a can." And I stood there in my kitchen with a split lip and a rebandaged leg and a house that still had glass on the back porch, and I ate a slice of Darcy Presley's zucchini bread, and it was the best thing I'd tasted in months. It was warm and dense, and the lemon zest hit right at the end, just a little brightness cutting through all that butter, and I thought, this is what it feels like to have a sister. That zucchini bread is going to matter later. And I still think about it sometimes, standing in my kitchen looking at the spot on the counter where she used to set the Tupperware, which tells you something about the kind of woman Darcy was. Or the kind of woman I thought she was. Same difference at the time. Let me back up and give you the full picture, because before this house became a crime scene with bluestone evidence markers and a broken screen door, it was the kind of place where the porch swing creaked in a rhythm that could put you to sleep by the second glass of sweet tea, and the magnolia tree in the backyard dropped blossoms so thick every April the yard looked like it was wearing a wedding dress. My mama, Gail Holloway, bought this house 11 years ago with money she'd saved from 23 years of working the front desk at a pediatric dentist office on Marymount Avenue. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen with countertops the color of creamed corn that she always meant to replace and never did. The yard was what sold her. She told me that the first time she walked out the back door and saw the magnolia tree, already 30 years old and wide enough to shade half the lawn, she turned to the realtor and said, "I'll take it." Didn't even look at the basement. She married Hank 5 years before she passed. I was 25 and already living on my own in a studio apartment in West Asheville, paying $975 a month for a place where the shower had 2 temperature settings, scalding and betrayal, and there was a patch of mold in the bathroom corner that I named Gerald because if you can't fix a problem, you might as well give it a personality. Hank seemed fine. He wasn't the warmest man you'd ever meet. He had the emotional range of a sawhorse, but he treated Mama well enough, kept the house up, built her a new porch railing with his own hands, mortise and tenon joints, the kind of craftsmanship that makes other carpenters nod with respect. He didn't drink more than a couple of beers on the porch after work, local stuff from Burial Beer, and he showed up for dinner every night at 6:15 like his stomach had a scheduling app. Mama didn't need a poet. She needed someone who'd change the furnace filter and show up. Hank did both. What Mama really loved was the garden. And I mean loved the way some people love their children, with that irrational, all-consuming tenderness that doesn't care about logic or reason or the fact that deer ate your hostas again for the 3rd year in a row. She planted peonies along the back fence. Big, blowsy, ridiculous peonies, the kind that droop under their own weight after a rainstorm and look like they're fainting on a Victorian sofa. She put in a lavender border along the walkway because she said it made the whole yard smell like a promise. She hung a hummingbird feeder from the lowest branch of the magnolia and spent entire evenings on the porch watching those little helicopters fight each other for sugar water. She kept a notebook. Green spiral cover, college ruled. My garden, my peace, written on the front in felt-tip pen. She carried it outside every morning with her coffee and made notes about what was blooming, what needed pruning, what the deer had destroyed overnight. She wrote in it the way some people write in a diary. Honestly, tenderly, with that loopy cursive that started big and confident on every letter and then got quiet toward the end, like she began each word with a shout and finished it with a whisper. There's a dried lavender petal pressed between pages 6 and 7. I know because I've read that notebook more times than I can count now, and every time I get to that petal, I stop. I just stop and hold the page open and smell it, even though it lost its scent a long time ago. I smell it anyway. When Mama got sick, 2 years before the night Hank put me through the screen door, I moved back in, gave up the apartment, said goodbye to Gerald the mold patch, and put my things in the basement bedroom that smelled like laundry detergent and old carpet. I took over the grocery runs, the pharmacy pickups, the 14 different medications that had to be organized in one of those weekly pill cases from the CVS on Tunnel Road, the kind with the little compartments labeled Monday through Sunday that snap shut with a sound like a tiny door closing. Pancreatic cancer doesn't negotiate. It doesn't sit down at the table and discuss terms. It walks into your life, takes what it wants, and leaves before you've finished processing the first sentence, the oncologist said. 9 weeks from diagnosis to the end. 9 weeks. That's not enough time to finish a semester of community college. It's barely enough time to get a couch delivered from a furniture store. And it was all the time my mama got. She spent most of those 9 weeks in the garden. Even when she couldn't kneel anymore, she'd sit in the folding chair Hank set up next to the peony bed and point at things with her coffee mug. That one needs deadheading. The lavender's getting leggy. Don't forget to fill the hummingbird feeder, baby. They get cranky when it's empty. 2 days before she died, lying in a hospital bed at Mission Hospital with tubes in her arms and a voice that had gone so thin I had to put my ear next to her mouth to hear her, she grabbed my wrist with a grip that surprised me. Strong for a woman who weighed 91 pounds, and she said, "Take care of my garden, baby. It'll take care of you back." I promised. I promised the way you promise a dying woman anything, with everything you have and no idea how you're going to keep it. The funeral was on a Thursday, October. The mountains were doing that thing they do in fall, turning gold and red and orange like the whole Blue Ridge was putting on a show just for her. Hank stood at the casket like somebody had pulled his power cord. Just stood there, hands at his sides, jaw set, staring at the satin lining like he was trying to memorize the stitching. Didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't move. And it was Darcy who held my hand through the whole service. Darcy drove me home from the cemetery. She didn't ask if I wanted her to. She just walked me to the Kia, opened the passenger door, and waited. Hank had driven himself in his truck and gone straight inside without a word, which was fine by me because I didn't have any words left for him and he clearly didn't have any for anyone. Darcy parked in the driveway and we sat there for a minute with the engine off, watching the last of the October light move through the maple tree in the front yard. The mountains behind the house were burning red and gold like the whole ridge was trying to outdo the funeral flowers. Darcy didn't say anything profound. She didn't quote scripture or offer some polished piece of grief advice she'd read on a wellness blog. She just sat there. And then she said, "Come on, let's go sit on the porch." We went around to the back, Mama's porch, the one with the swing and the hummingbird feeder and the view of the garden that Mama had spent years turning into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine, the kind of magazine where every photo has morning light and a woman in linen holding a watering can. The peonies were done for the season, but the lavender was still holding on, stubborn purple stalks, refusing to admit that fall had come. The magnolia was dropping its last few petals. Darcy sat on the swing and patted the spot next to her. I sat down and the swing creaked under our combined weight, and for a while we just rocked, back and forth, in a rhythm that Mama would have loved. "We're going to get through this," Darcy said, not looking at me, looking at the garden. Both of us, together, Sisters. She said it like she meant it. She said it like a vow. And I sat there on my dead mama's porch swing, smelling the last of the lavender, and I believed her with every broken thing inside me. 3 months after Mama passed, Hank started changing. I mentioned this already, but let me give you the slow version because that's how it happened. Slowly. The way a faucet drips. You don't notice the water damage until the ceiling caves in. New lock on his workshop, the one in the garage where he kept his tools, and, as I'd later discover, all of Mama's important papers, rules about the kitchen. I was supposed to buy my own groceries, keep them on a separate shelf. He started referring to the house as his property. Not our home, not the house, his property. Like I was a tenant who'd overstayed a lease I never signed. I mentioned the changes to Darcy. We were at the Early Girl Eatery on Wall Street, one of those Asheville places where the menu has words like locally foraged and heritage grains, and everything comes with a side of moral superiority. Darcy had insisted on buying. Wouldn't take no for an answer. She never took no for an answer about paying, which I used to think was generous and now understand was strategic, but we'll get there. She leaned across the table, both hands wrapped around a matcha that cost $7, and she said something that sounded so wise and so compassionate that I wrote it on my napkin with the little golf pencil they give you for the wait list. She told me her dad had always been like this when he was hurting, that he'd pushed her mom away during the first divorce. Same pattern. Withdrew, got territorial, started treating the people closest to him like enemies. It wasn't about me, she said. He was grieving. And grief makes some men mean because they don't know what else to do with it. They can't cry, so they clench. They can't talk, so they slam doors. That made sense. That sounded exactly right. And I held on to it like a lifeline for the next year and a half while Hank got worse and worse. Every time he snapped at me, I heard Darcy's voice. He's grieving. Every time he made me feel like an intruder in my own mama's house, I told myself what Darcy told me. It's not about you. She trained me to tolerate him. I just didn't know that's what she was doing. Darcy remembered the anniversary of Mama's death, showed up at the cemetery without being asked, without being reminded, without any announcement or expectation of praise. Just texted me a photo of a bundle of lavender stems she'd laid across the headstone. Mama's favorite. The purple was so bright against the gray granite it looked like the stone was blooming. She paid for my lunch every single time we went out, even when I argued, even when I tried to grab the check, even when I slid my card across the table before the server came. She'd wave me off and say, "Please, let me do this. You do enough." She told me once, sitting on my front porch with sweet tea and the sound of cicadas filling the yard, that I was the sister she'd always wanted. And the way she said it, looking right at me, voice cracking just enough to sound real, eyes going wet at the edges, I believed it down to my bones. She even made me laugh about her own disasters. Her engagement had fallen apart 2 years before Mama died. A man named Bryce, who proposed with a ring he swore was handcrafted by an artisan jeweler in the mountains. Turned out he'd bought it on Etsy from a shop called Mountain Made Treasures that was based in Shenzhen. "Babe," she said, imitating his voice with devastating accuracy, "I picked this with my own 2 hands. From a screen. At 2 a.m. With free shipping." I laughed so hard my green tea came out of my nose, which is not a dignified thing to do at the Early Girl Eatery, where everyone around you is quietly enjoying their heritage grain bowl and pretending to have their life together. But Darcy didn't care. She laughed too. She always laughed too. And I thought, sitting there wiping tea off my chin with a cloth napkin, at least I have her. At least one person in this family has a heart. And I held on to that like a life raft for the next year and a half while Hank got worse, because Darcy was always there, always warm, always right. And I never once asked myself why someone would work that hard to be perfect. Because when you're drowning, you don't interrogate the hand that's pulling you up, you just grab it. Hank was charged with simple assault. The torn stitches, the broken screen door, the glass on the garden stones, and Opal Hutchins' 911 call made it about as straightforward as these things get. He was out on bail in 32 hours, which is a number that still makes me want to fold laundry aggressively. But that's the system. The system processes a man who shoved his stepdaughter through a door the same way it processes a parking violation. Methodically, indifferently, and with a lot of forms. The judge issued a temporary protection order. Hank couldn't come within 100 feet of me or the house. He moved into the Mountain View Motor Lodge on Tunnel Road, which was the kind of establishment that had a continental breakfast consisting of a basket of muffins wrapped in cellophane and a coffee pot that looked like it had been brewing since the first Bush administration. $42 a night. The sign out front was missing the V in view, so it just read, Mountain EU Motor Lodge. Somebody had tried to fix it with duct tape at some point and the tape had peeled off, leaving a sticky gray rectangle where the letter used to be. I tried not to enjoy that detail. I failed completely. Darcy was furious, or she seemed furious, which, as I'd later find out, was not the same thing at all. The distance between seeming furious and being furious is the distance between a photograph of fire and an actual fire. One of them burns you. The other one just looks convincing. She called me the morning after Hank posted bail. Long call. 43 minutes. I know because my phone logged it and I looked at the number afterward, thinking that's almost an hour this woman spent on the phone making sure I was okay. She told me she'd given Hank a piece of her mind, said she told him he was lucky I didn't push for felony charges, that what he did was unforgivable, that Mama would be rolling in her grave if she knew her husband had laid hands on her daughter. Her voice shook when she said it. She paused in all the right places, and I sat in my kitchen holding a bag of frozen corn against my jaw because I'd run out of frozen peas, and I felt grateful. Grateful for Darcy. That's the thing that still finds me at 2 a.m. sometimes, how grateful I was for the person who was taking apart my life one careful stitch at a time. But I didn't know that yet. Right now, in this part of the story, Darcy was still my hero. Hank called me once from a blocked number. I picked up because I thought it was the insurance company calling about the emergency room bill, which was the kind of optimism that should qualify as a medical condition. 10 seconds of breathing. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of breathing that's meant to be heard. Then he hung up. That was it. 10 seconds. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and thought, this man has the communication skills of a crank caller and the emotional depth of a parking meter. Meanwhile, my car was staging a rebellion. The Subaru had developed a new personality trait, which was stalling at random locations around Asheville like it was protesting its own existence. It died on me in the middle of Haywood Road in West Asheville during afternoon traffic. It quit at a stoplight on Tunnel Road while an 18-wheeler honked behind me like I was choosing to sit there. It gave out in the parking lot of the River Arts District one evening when all I wanted was to sit by the French Broad River and feel sorry for myself in a scenic location. The dashboard looked like a casino, every light blinking, none of them winners. Cassie Nguyen, my friend from the vet clinic, started picking me up on mornings when the Subaru was feeling philosophical. Cassie was a vet tech, 28, 5'2", and had the energy of a woman who'd been mainlining cold brew since 6 a.m, which she had. She drove a Honda that had a bumper sticker that said, "Adopt, don't shop," next to another one that said, "I found my spirit animal and it needs a foster home." There was a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror, golden retriever fur on every surface, including the ceiling, which I never figured out, and French fry crumbs in crevices that hadn't been cleaned since the Obama administration. She'd pull up honking at 7:40 in the morning and I'd run out like we were in a heist movie, except the heist was getting to Blue Ridge Veterinary Partners on time, so Dr. Morrison wouldn't give me that look. The look that said, "I value you, but I'm keeping a list, and the list is getting long." Dr. Morrison saw the bruise on my cheekbone the first week back. I told him I hit the porch railing moving furniture. He didn't believe me. I could tell by the way he took off his glasses and cleaned them very slowly, which is the Dr. Morrison equivalent of screaming. But he let it go. He was a kind man. He also mentioned, very gently, the way you mention something when you want someone to hear it without feeling cornered, that the clinic manager position was opening up in March, and he thought I'd be a strong candidate. If things stabilized. If. That word sat on my desk like a paperweight for the rest of the day. If things stabilized, if my car started, if my stepdad stayed away, if the house was still mine, if. I thanked him and spent my lunch break in the bathroom with the door locked, gripping the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white, doing math in my head that never added up. $3,847 for the emergency room, $580 for the alternator the Subaru would eventually need. $2,560 take-home pay per month. Electric bill, $138. Groceries, $240 if I was careful, which meant rice and beans and the kind of creativity with canned goods that would impress a doomsday prepper. The numbers didn't work. They didn't work the way a hiking boot doesn't fit into a ballet slipper. No matter how you angle it, something is getting crushed. Darcy told me I needed to document everything, write it all down. Every time Hank had yelled, every threat, every nasty comment he'd made about me not pulling my weight or squatting in his house or being a burden on a family that wasn't mine. Dates, times, exact words if I could remember them. She brought me a notebook for it. Small, leather-bound, the kind you'd buy at a stationery shop downtown. Evidence, she called it, just in case things get ugly in court. And it was good advice. Solid advice. The kind of advice you'd get from a lawyer or a domestic violence advocate or someone who genuinely wanted to protect you. The only problem was that Darcy wasn't giving me that advice because she wanted to protect me. She was giving it to me because as long as I was writing down every terrible thing Hank said, as long as I was building a detailed case against Vernon Hank Presley, I was looking in one direction, his direction, and I wasn't looking at the woman sitting across from me with the helpful suggestions and the warm brown eyes and the Tupperware full of zucchini bread. But I didn't know that yet. I wrote in that notebook every night like it was homework. Dated entries, quoted phrases, even the approximate time of day Hank had called from the blocked number. I was thorough. I was organized. I was building a fortress around the wrong enemy, and Darcy was handing me the bricks with a sympathetic smile. She also offered to go through Hank's workshop while he was banned from the house. The workshop was in the garage, a space that smelled like sawdust and linseed oil and the particular brand of organized chaos that carpenters seem to thrive in. Hank had put a new lock on it 3 months after Mama died, one of those combination padlocks from the hardware store, and I'd never had the code, but Darcy did. She'd gotten it from Hank months ago, she said, back when she was helping him organize some of Mama's things after the funeral. "Let me dig around," she said. "If there's anything useful in there, I'll find it." She spent a whole Saturday afternoon in that sawdust-covered room while I sat on the couch watching home renovation shows and trying not to think about the fact that my actual home needed more renovation than anything on television. She came out around 5 o'clock with dust in her hair and a satisfied look on her face and a manila folder that she set on my kitchen table like she was presenting evidence to a jury. "You need to see this," she said. The folder was useful, I'll give her that. There were bank statements showing overdrafts going back 8 months. A credit card I didn't know about, opened 4 months after Mama died, maxed out at $6,200. Receipts from Thirsty Monk, the brewery on Patton Avenue, showing weekly tabs that ranged from $40 to $90. Suspicious charges at places I didn't recognize. It painted a picture of a man who was drowning financially and hiding it behind a locked workshop door and a combination padlock. She handed it to me like she was handing me a weapon. And it was a weapon. Everything in that folder pointed straight at Hank. Every receipt, every overdraft, every hidden credit card charge was an arrow aimed at the man who'd put me through a screen door. What wasn't in that folder was anything connecting Darcy to Hank's finances. No joint accounts, no shared expenses, no record of the conversations they'd been having for months about how to get me out of the house. Nothing that showed Darcy's fingerprints on any of it. Funny how that worked out. Then I found the property tax notice. It was in the mailbox on a Thursday afternoon, sandwiched between a coupon for a pizza place I'd never been to and the electric bill that was already 2 weeks past due. Buncombe County. 2 years delinquent. $2,940. Hank hadn't paid property taxes on Mama's house in 2 years. The house she saved for, the house she planted peonies in front of, the house where she hung wind chimes on the back porch because the sound reminded her of her own mother. The house she told me to take care of 2 days before she died. 2 years. While he was drinking $40 tabs at Thirsty Monk and maxing out a secret credit card on charges I still can't fully explain, the county had been sending notices that went straight into the workshop and straight into a drawer and straight into oblivion. I sat on the front porch steps with that notice in my hand and the lavender border dying along the walkway beside me. I should mention that the garden was dying. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly. The way things die when nobody pays attention. The peonies had finished blooming and the deadheads were still on the stems because I hadn't had the time or the energy to cut them. The lavender that Mama had tended every morning with her coffee and her green notebook was going brown at the edges, stems turning woody and stiff. The hummingbird feeder was empty, had been for weeks. The little helicopters had stopped coming. Mama's garden was dying and I hadn't done a thing about it. I'd broken the one promise I'd made her, the only thing she'd asked me for, and I was too buried under hospital bills and assault charges and a car that wouldn't start to even notice the lavender curling up along the path. I didn't cry. I went inside at 1 a.m. and alphabetized the spice rack. Then I unalphabetized it and re-alphabetized it by cuisine type, then by color, then by frequency of use. Then back to alphabetical because at that point I'd lost the plot entirely, but my hands needed to do something and the spice rack was there and it wasn't going to fight me or charge me rent or hand me a quitclaim deed at 7:45 on a Tuesday. When your hands don't know what to do with rage, they organize things. It's not healthy, but it's quieter than screaming. I went to see a lawyer, Ann Whitfield, on Lexington Avenue, recommended by Cassie's cousin who'd used her in a landlord dispute 2 years ago. Her office was on the second floor of a narrow brick building above a crystal shop called Moonstone and Sage that sold amethyst clusters and tarot decks and little bundles of dried sage tied with twine. Every time I walked up those stairs, I passed through a wall of nag champa and patchouli so thick you could almost chew it. The incense seeped through the floorboards and settled into the carpet and the curtains, and probably into Ann Whitfield's legal briefs. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that the entire consultation smelled like a spiritual retreat that happened to have a notary. Every time I think about property law now, I want to light incense. Can't help it. Pavlov's client. Anne was a quiet woman with silver hair pulled back in a clip and a desk covered in papers that looked like they'd been accumulating since the building was constructed. She charged $250 for the hour, which I put on the credit card I'd been trying not to use, the one with the 14.9% interest rate that I could feel gaining weight in my wallet every time I swiped it. She had a way of looking at you over her reading glasses that made you feel like she was reading the fine print of your soul. She told me what I'd been hoping to hear. Mama's name on the deed meant her share of the house, roughly half of $183,000 based on the most recent assessment, was part of her estate. And since Mama didn't have a will naming anyone else, Pennsylvania intestacy law, which North Carolina follows a similar version of, gave that share to me, her only child. Her daughter who'd moved home to organize pill cases and make pharmacy runs and sit beside her bed reading aloud from garden magazines because the words kept her calm when the morphine wasn't enough. That was the good news. Then Anne told me the bad news. And the bad news arrived the way bad news always does in a lawyer's office, quietly, precisely, and with a document attached. She'd pulled the county records. The deed had been refiled 13 months ago. New filing showed only one name, Hank Presley. Somebody had submitted a quitclaim deed, a legal document that transfers property ownership with Mama's signature on it. My Mama had been dead for over a year when that quitclaim was filed. My hands went cold. Not the dramatic kind of cold you read about in novels where the heroine gasps and clutches her pearls. The actual physical kind where your fingers turn white and the blood retreats from your extremities like it's evacuating a building and you can't grip the pen the lawyer is handing you because your body has decided that fine, motor skills are no longer a priority. I sat in that incense-soaked office and stared at Ann Whitfield while she explained what this meant. A quitclaim deed signed after the grantor's death was void on its face, legally meaningless. A piece of paper pretending to be something it wasn't. But voiding it required the original deed, a formal challenge filed with the county, and ideally a handwriting comparison to prove the signature was forged. She pulled out the copy of the quitclaim that had been filed, slid it across the desk next to a crystal paperweight that I'm fairly certain had come from the shop downstairs, and she pointed to Mama's signature. Gail Marie Holloway Presley. I knew my Mama's signature the way you know your own heartbeat. I'd seen it on every permission slip from elementary school. Every birthday card she'd ever given me, the ones with the handwritten notes inside that I kept in a shoebox in my closet, because throwing away your Mama's handwriting felt like throwing away a piece of her voice. Every check she wrote to the PTA, every note she left on the kitchen counter when she went to the store, every page of that green garden notebook. Mama's G was unmistakable. It started high on the line, swept upward like a bird lifting off a branch, wings spread wide, and then curved down and forward into the rest of her name with a kind of momentum that felt like confidence turning into grace. Like she launched each word into the air and let it glide. I once told her that her G looked like it was flying, and she laughed and said, "Well, baby, it's got places to go." The G on the quitclaim deed was wrong. I could see it without a magnifying glass, without a forensic expert, without anything except the memory of my mother's hand moving across a page. This G was clipped, grounded, mechanical. Every stroke controlled and careful in a way that Mama's handwriting never was. It looked like someone had studied her signature from a photograph and tried to reproduce the shape without understanding the motion. Like drawing a bird from a picture instead of watching one fly. Someone had practiced. Someone had gotten close. But close isn't the same as true, and the difference between Mama's G and this forgery was the difference between a living thing and a copy of a living thing. One has a heartbeat, the other just has ink. Anne filed the challenge that afternoon. The motion went to a judge in Buncombe County, and I walked down the stairs past the crystal shop and through the Nag Champa cloud and out into the November air on Lexington Avenue and stood on the sidewalk feeling like the ground had shifted 2 inches to the left. Someone had forged my dead mother's signature to steal her house, and I didn't know who yet. But I was about to call someone who did. I called Darcy from the sidewalk on Lexington Avenue. The Subaru had stalled twice on the way to Anne's office, once at the intersection of Marymount and Murdoch, and once in the parking garage on Rankin Avenue, where it decided that second gear was a suggestion rather than a requirement. So I was already running on fumes and frustration and the particular kind of adrenaline that comes from learning someone forged your dead mother's name on a legal document. Darcy picked up on the second ring. She always picked up on the second ring. Not the first, because that would seem too eager. Not the third, because that might seem indifferent. The second ring, every time. I used to think that was just Darcy being Darcy. Now I think she had a system for everything, even the small things. Especially the small things. I told her everything. The quit claim, the forged signature, the 13 months, the G that didn't fly. 3 seconds of silence. 3 seconds doesn't sound like much. It's the time it takes to sneeze, or to flip a light switch, or to decide whether you want cream in your coffee. But when you've just told someone that your dead mother's signature was forged on a property document, 3 seconds of silence on the other end of the phone feels like an ocean. You could drown in 3 seconds of the wrong kind of quiet. Then Darcy exploded. He forged Mom's signature? Are you kidding me? After everything he's already done? After putting you through that door? After the hospital? After all of it? He forges her name on a deed? A dead woman's name, Wren. Our mother's name, our mother. She said our mother. Gail wasn't Darcy's mother. Gail was her stepmother. But Darcy said it like a claim, like a flag planted in shared grief, and it landed exactly where she wanted it to land. Right in the center of my chest where the gratitude lived. She told me she'd help me find the original deed. She told me we'd fight this together. She told me Hank was going to regret every single thing he'd done, that he'd picked a fight with the wrong family, that Mama didn't raise a quitter, and neither did she. And I sat on a bench outside the crystal shop with Nag Champa still clinging to my jacket and the November wind cutting down Lexington Avenue, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Like I wasn't standing in this alone. Like somebody had my back. Like the ground might actually hold. I drove home in the Subaru, which had apparently decided to cooperate for the afternoon, and went straight to the basement. Mama's fireproof box was on the metal shelf next to the water heater, wedged between a box of Christmas ornaments and a plastic bin of tax returns going back to 2012. Gray metal, heavy. The size of a briefcase. Mama's handwriting on the label in that loopy felt-tip cursive. Important. Do not throw away. I'd seen this box 100 times. Mama kept it on the same shelf for years. I'd helped her file things in it when I was a teenager, watching her organize documents with the same care she gave her garden, everything in its place, everything labeled, everything tended. She believed in paper. She didn't trust computers with the things that mattered. Screens break, baby, she told me once. Paper waits. I opened it. Inside, on top, the deed. Both names, Gail Marie Holloway Presley and Hank Allen Presley, dated 5 years ago, the month they married. Mama's signature was right there, and seeing it after everything Anne had told me was like hearing her voice in an empty room. The G soaring up off the line, wings wide, then gliding into the rest of her name with that easy confidence that made her handwriting look like it was going somewhere beautiful. Underneath the deed, her death certificate. I didn't linger on that. Some documents you learn to turn past quickly, like a page in a book you've already read and don't need to read again. And beneath the death certificate, the garden notebook. Green spiral cover. My garden, my peace. Felt tip pen. I pulled it out and held it, and the cover was cool against my palms and slightly warped from humidity because the basement wasn't climate controlled and Mama would have scolded me for keeping it down here. She would have wanted it upstairs, near the window, near the light, near the garden it was written about. I opened it, flipped through the first few pages, her planting schedule for spring, written in pencil so she could erase and adjust, a note about the peony varieties she'd ordered from a catalog. Sarah Bernhardt, double pink, mid-season. Festiva maxima, white with crimson flecks, early bloomer. Both need full sun and good drainage. Remind Hank to fix the downspout. I smiled. I actually smiled sitting on the basement floor next to the water heater, reading my dead mama's garden notes, because her handwriting still sounded like her. Every loop and swoop had her voice in it. I could hear her saying the words as I read them, that gentle Appalachian cadence that stretched vowels like warm taffy. I flipped a few more pages. Notes about lavender pruning, a sketch of the garden layout with the magnolia tree, drawn as a big circle in the center, and little labels for each bed, a reminder to buy hummingbird food. I closed the notebook, put it back in the box. I didn't flip it over. I didn't read from the back. I didn't turn it around and start from the last page, the way you might flip a magazine to see how the story ends. Not yet. I brought the deed upstairs to photograph it, sent the images to Anne. She confirmed it matched the filing records and told me the challenge was moving forward. The original signature versus the quitclaim signature. Even she could see the difference, and Anne Whitfield had been practicing property law for 26 years. "That's not your mother's hand," she said on the phone, matter-of-factly, the way you'd say the sky is blue or water is wet. Not even close. The notebook stayed in the box, in the basement, in the dark, waiting. Hank's lawyer was a man named Todd Brinkley. Todd Brinkley. I need you to sit with that name for a second, because it sounds like it belongs to a guy who sells timeshares at a resort where the pool is always closed for maintenance. And honestly, that might have been a step up from Todd's actual marketing strategy. His face was printed on the pizza box liner at Asheville Pizza and Brewing on Marymount Avenue. Right there on the greasy paper between your pepperoni slice and the cardboard, Todd Brinkley's face, smiling in a tie that didn't quite match his shirt, next to a coupon for a free order of garlic knots with any large pie. Same font for both, same energy. Need a lawyer? Need garlic knots? We've got you covered. That was the legal mind Hank assembled to fight me in court, a man whose professional headshot shared real estate with a bread product. Todd filed a counter motion 3 weeks after Anne submitted the quitclaim challenge. I read it sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold because I'd forgotten about it the way I forgot about everything that wasn't actively on fire. The motion claimed that I was, and I need you to hear these exact words, a hostile occupant with no legitimate ownership interest who had been verbally abusive and threatening toward the legal homeowner. Verbally abusive. The man whose client had shoved me through a glass door was accusing me of hostility. The man whose client's palm print was probably still on my sternum was filing paperwork claiming I was the aggressive one. The audacity wasn't just bold. It was architectural. It had load-bearing walls and a foundation, and someone had clearly put some thought into it, even if that someone charged by the pizza box. Anne said the motion was weak. The evidence didn't support it. Opal's 911 call, the police report, my medical records, the photographs of the broken door and the blood on the garden stones, all of it pointed in one direction, and it wasn't toward me being a hostile anything. But weak motions still take time to answer. The court scheduled a response date 3.5 weeks out. 3.5 weeks. 24 days of waiting while Hank sat at the Mountain IU Motor Lodge eating cellophane muffins, and I sat in Mama's house wondering whether the walls were going to be mine or a memory. Hank was unraveling. The Mountain IU was costing him $42 a night, which added up to roughly $1,260 a month, which was more than the mortgage payment on the house he couldn't live in. His carpentry jobs were getting shorter. The general contractor he subcontracted for didn't love having a guy with a pending assault charge swinging hammers on residential job sites. Hard to sell a kitchen renovation when the installer has a court date. Darcy kept me updated, or she seemed to keep me updated, which I was learning were two very different verbs. She called one evening while I was eating leftover spaghetti straight from the pot because I'd run out of clean bowls, and dish soap was $11, and I was rationing everything, including dignity. She told me she'd spoken to Hank, told me he was a mess, told me he'd tried to call her 6 times in one day and she'd only picked up once, and when she did, he'd gone on a rant about how I was trying to steal his house and ruin his life. She said she'd set him straight, told him he was lucky I hadn't pushed for felony charges, told him Mama would be ashamed. "He's spiraling," she said, and there was a tiredness in her voice that sounded real. It sounded like a woman caught between a father she couldn't control and a sister she was trying to protect. It sounded like exactly what I needed to hear. And that was the thing about Darcy. She always sounded like exactly what you needed to hear. The temperature of her concern was always precisely calibrated to the weather of your crisis. I didn't realize until much later that a thermostat that perfect isn't natural, it's engineered. Hank called me once more from a blocked number. This time he didn't just breathe. He said 4 words, "This isn't over, Ren." Then he hung up. The line went dead, and I stood in my kitchen holding my phone in one hand and a fork in the other, rigatoni cooling on the stove behind me, and I thought about calling Anne. I thought about calling the police. I thought about throwing the phone into the backyard and letting the squirrels deal with it. I saved the call log, forwarded it to Anne, sent a screenshot to Cassie because Cassie had told me to document everything, and Cassie was the kind of friend who meant it. Then I went back to my rigatoni. I'd like to tell you I was brave and unbothered. I wasn't. My hand shook a little bit, holding the fork. Just a tremor, barely visible, the kind of shake you'd only notice if you were looking for it. But the pasta was good. Store-brand rigatoni with meat sauce from a jar, nothing fancy, the kind of meal that exists in the space between giving up and trying. And I'd learned by then that you eat when you can and you fall apart on your own schedule, not someone else's. 3.5 weeks of waiting. And Darcy kept showing up, kept being perfect, kept bringing zucchini bread in Tupperware with her name in Sharpie on the lid, kept calling at the right time, saying the right thing, squeezing my hand at the right moment, kept being exactly the sister I needed, which should have been the first warning sign. Darcy showed up that Saturday with a ceramic hummingbird, red, hand-painted, about the size of a fist. The kind of thing you'd find at one of those artisan booths at the Grove Arcade downtown, the ones where everything costs more than you expect because someone poured their whole personality into a piece of clay and fired it with intention. It had tiny gold details on the wings that caught the light when you turned it, and the beak was slightly open, like it was about to drink from something sweet. She put it in my hands like she was transferring something sacred. Held it out with both palms and waited for me to take it, and when I did, she kept her hands under mine for a second longer than necessary. A gesture that said, "This matters. This is more than an object." "Mom gave me this years ago," she said. And I want you to notice that she said, "Mom," not my dad's wife, not Gail, Mom. She weaponized that word the way a carpenter weaponizes a nail gun. Precisely, efficiently, and always aimed at the softest part of the wood. "I want you to have it. Sisters don't let go." And she looked at me with those brown eyes that always seemed a little wet, a little too warm, a little too perfectly arranged to make you feel like the most important person in a room, in a yard, in the world. The kind of eyes that should come with a warning label. Caution. Contents may not reflect actual feelings. I cried. I actually cried. Standing in my own doorway holding a ceramic bird, crying in front of a woman who was at that exact moment probably calculating the return on investment of a $40 hummingbird against the value of a $91,500 half interest in a house. But I didn't know that math yet. I just knew the hummingbird felt heavy and smooth in my hands, and that Mama had loved those little birds. She'd sit on the back porch for entire evenings watching them fight over the feeder, and she'd narrate their battles like a sports announcer, and the ruby throat takes the lead. Oh, but here comes the Rufus from the south side. "Dirty move, little man, dirty move." I put the hummingbird on my kitchen windowsill, right where the morning light hit, and every day after that, I looked at it while I made my coffee, and I thought about Darcy, and I thought about Mama, and I thought about how at least one good thing had come from all this wreckage. She offered to lend me $350 for the car repair. The Subaru had added a new trick to its repertoire, which was refusing to go in reverse, just wouldn't do it. The shifter would move to the R position, and the car would sit there like a stubborn dog that had decided this particular spot on the sidewalk was where it lived now. Which meant I had to strategically park facing outward everywhere I went, like a getaway driver who was always ready for a heist but never actually committed one. I said no to the money, she insisted. You can pay me back whenever. I know what it's like to be stuck. When Bryce left, I couldn't afford gas for 3 months. I was driving around Asheville on fumes and prayer. The prayer worked better than the fumes, honestly. I laughed. I always laughed when Darcy talked about Bryce. The man had become our shared punchline, our inside joke, the comic relief in a story that needed all the relief it could get. And I took the $350 because my Subaru had decided that reverse was a philosophical concept rather than a mechanical function, and there's only so long you can strategically park facing outward before people start asking questions. Things at the clinic started turning around, 2 weeks straight without missing a shift. Cassie was still driving me most mornings, honking at 7:40 with golden retriever fur drifting through the air conditioning vents like pet-flavored snow. My Subaru was in the shop, the $350 covering the labor but not all the parts, which meant it was a work in progress, which meant it was a lot like everything else in my life. Dr. Morrison pulled me aside after a staff meeting. Small office, smelled like antiseptic and the eucalyptus diffuser his wife had gotten him for Christmas. He told me the clinic manager decision was in 2 weeks and I was still in the running. He said it gently, the way you place a butterfly back on a leaf, but his eyes were serious. He meant it. I walked back to my desk and sat very still for about 4 minutes, feeling something I hadn't felt since before Mama got sick. I think it was hope. Or gas. Hard to tell sometimes. They both hit you in the chest and make you want to either celebrate or sit down. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, at least she has Darcy. At least one person in that family shows up. At least one person drives you to the courthouse and holds your hand and brings zucchini bread and gives you a ceramic hummingbird and lends you $350 and remembers your mama's favorite flowers and calls you sis and means it. Hold that thought. All right, hold on. I need to stop for just a second. If you've made it this far into my catastrophe, and it is a catastrophe, we're not even at the worst part yet. I need to say something. Thank you. From the bottom of my broken, stitched-up, spice rack organizing heart. If you haven't subscribed, I would genuinely love it if you did. And do me a favor. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one. And I'm not just saying that the way people say that. I actually read them. I see you 3 in the morning, people. I see you hiding in the break room at work, people. I see you watching in the bathtub, people. You're my people. Okay, back to the disaster. The judge voided the quitclaim in 6 minutes. I want to tell you it was dramatic. I want to tell you there were courtroom gasps and a gavel slamming and Hank falling to his knees while violins played somewhere in the distance, and Anne Whitfield stood up and pointed at the defendant like a lawyer in a movie that wins all. The awards. It wasn't. It was a Tuesday morning in Buncombe County Courthouse, room 214, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of bees that had been hired by the county and were deeply unhappy about it. The carpet was gray. The walls were gray. The judge's expression was gray. Everything about that room existed in the narrow spectrum between beige and exhaustion. Judge Raymond Acker looked like a man who had been sitting in that chair since the building was constructed and had developed a personal relationship with every crack in the ceiling. He reviewed the signatures. He reviewed the filing dates. He noted, with the enthusiasm of a man reading the ingredients on a cereal box, that the quitclaim deed had been executed 13 months after Gail Marie Holloway Presley's documented date of death. He voided it in 6 minutes. Maybe 5. I wasn't counting precisely because my hands were busy doing that thing where they grip your purse straps, like the purse is the only thing keeping you attached to the earth. 6 minutes. 13 months of fraud undone, while I was still sitting in a hard plastic chair holding my bag in my lap like I was at church. Anne leaned over and whispered, "That went well." The woman had a gift for understatement the way the Blue Ridge Mountains have a gift for being there, massive, obvious, and completely unfazed. I wanted to hug her. But Anne Whitfield didn't seem like a hugger. She seemed like a woman who celebrated legal victories by going downstairs to the vending machine and purchasing a sparkling water with exact change. Or possibly by going back to the crystal shop below her office and buying herself an amethyst. Either way, physical contact did not appear to be part of her celebration protocol, so I shook her hand and tried not to hyperventilate in the hallway. The deed was restored to joint names. Gail's share, my inheritance, was legally mine. On paper, at least. There were still steps. The assault case was grinding forward on its own timeline. Hank's living situation at the Mountain IU remained unresolved. The question of what you do with a house that two people technically co-own when one of them recently shoved the other one through a glass door was still very much on the table, but the foundation was there. My name, Mama's name. On the deed where they belonged. Cassie took me out for tacos that evening. White Duck Taco Shop on Roberts Street, the one in the old gas station with the corrugated metal walls and the picnic tables outside where you could watch the trains go by on the tracks across the river. She ordered the lamb gyro taco. I got the fried chicken. We sat on a bench with hot sauce dripping on our jeans, and she raised her Mexican Coke and said, "Girl, your mom is doing cartwheels up in heaven right now. Full rotations." Sticking the landing. I clinked my bottle against hers and felt, for the first time in maybe a year, like I was winning something. Not the lottery, not the war. Just a single round in a fight that had been going on so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to land a punch. I celebrated getting my name back on that deed by buying a bottle of Prosecco from the Ingalls Market on Tunnel Road, $4.99. The label had a picture of a vineyard on it that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never actually visited Italy but had seen a calendar once. It tasted like sparkling disappointment with Italian ambitions. The bubbles were confused and the aftertaste was an apology. But I drank every drop standing in my kitchen at 9:30 on a Wednesday night, and I raised the glass to the ceiling because that's where I figured Mama was watching from. "We got it back," I said out loud to no one. "We got it back, Mama." And then I looked out the back window. The garden was a ghost of what it used to be. The peonies Mama had loved so fiercely were bare stalks, dead heads still clinging to the stems like they were waiting for someone to tell them the season was over. The lavender border had gone woody and brown, stiff and brittle, the kind of brown that doesn't come back without serious intervention. The hummingbird feeder hung empty from the magnolia branch, swaying slightly in the evening wind, and the magnolia itself had dropped its leaves in that messy way magnolias do in winter, big waxy leaves scattered across the garden beds like discarded love letters. Mama's garden, the one she'd asked me to take care of, the one she said would take care of me back. I'd been so busy fighting for the house that I'd forgotten to fight for what made the house worth having. That weekend, I drove to Reams Creek Nursery on the north side of town, bought a bag of potting soil, a bag of compost, a pair of gardening gloves that were on sale for $6, and a trowel that cost $4. The woman at the register, silver-haired, sunburned, the kind of person who looked like she'd been growing things since before I was born, looked at my haul and said, "Starting fresh or bringing something back?" "Bringing something back," I said. She nodded like that was the right answer. I started going out to the garden every morning before work. 6:15, coffee in one hand, trowel in the other. I cleared the deadheads from the peonies. I pruned the lavender back hard, the way Mama's notebook said to do, cutting down to the new growth at the base where the green was still hiding under the brown. I pulled weeds from around the magnolia roots. I filled the hummingbird feeder with fresh sugar water. And every morning, kneeling in that red Carolina clay with dirt under my fingernails and Mama's garden slowly waking up around me, I felt closer to her than I had since the day she died. Like the soil was a telephone and the roots were the wires, and somewhere on the other end, she was listening. I was 3 weeks into this routine when I decided to replant the peony bed along the back fence. The soil there had compacted over 2 years of neglect and needed turning. I grabbed my trowel, knelt beside the magnolia tree, and started digging. I need you to understand the setting, because it matters. I was kneeling in red Carolina clay at 7:15 on a Saturday morning, with dirt in my hair and earthworms in my peripheral vision, and a $4 trowel from Reams Creek Nursery in my right hand. There was coffee cooling on the porch rail behind me, and a mockingbird going through its entire repertoire in the magnolia tree above my head, cycling through stolen songs like a feathered jukebox. The air smelled like damp soil and the particular sweetness of early spring in the mountains when everything is about to bloom but hasn't committed yet. That's where I was when my entire understanding of the last 18 months collapsed. Not in a courtroom, not in a lawyer's office that smelled like Nag Champa and justice. In the dirt, on my knees, next to my mama's magnolia tree, with a worm crawling across my left shoe. I'd gone inside a few minutes earlier to get the garden notebook from the fireproof box in the basement. I wanted to check Mama's notes on the peony varieties she'd planted along the back fence. She'd written down everything: the cultivar names, the spacing, the soil amendments, and I wanted to replant them the way she would have done it. The right varieties in the right spots. I wanted to honor the blueprint. I carried the notebook outside and sat cross-legged in the clay beside the magnolia and opened it from the front, the way you're supposed to open a notebook, the way my mama intended it to be read. Page 1, Spring Planting Schedule, her loopy felt-tip cursive marching across the lines with that confident momentum I'd loved my whole life. Page 2, a list of perennials she wanted to add. Echinacea for the butterflies. Black-eyed Susan for the color. Russian sage, if I can find it on sale. I flipped forward. Page 8, Peony Notes. Sarah Bernhardt, double pink, mid-season bloomer. Needs full sun and good drainage. Planted 3 along the back fence, 18 inches apart. They'll need staking by year 2. Page 11, a note that stopped me. The peonies bloom today. I cried. Good tears. The Sarah Bernhardts are so heavy they're touching the ground. I should have staked them, but I didn't want to. I wanted to see what they'd do on their own. They drooped. They drooped beautifully. I sat there with that sentence in my lap, and the magnolia above me and the mockingbird still cycling through its playlist, and I missed my mama so much it felt like a physical thing. Like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed, not hard enough to break anything. Just hard enough to remind you that the thing they're squeezing is still beating and still capable of hurting this much after all this time. I almost closed the notebook. I almost took it inside and put it back in the box and gone on with my Saturday, but something made me flip it over. Curiosity, maybe. Or the part of my brain that had been quietly suspicious for months without telling the rest of me. I'd only ever read from the front. Mama's pages. Mama's voice. But the notebook was thick. And the back felt different somehow. Heavier. Like there were pages pressed together with more force than garden notes required. I turned the notebook over, opened the back cover, and started reading from the last page forward. The handwriting changed. Not Mama's. Not that loopy, flying cursive that started big and landed soft. This was different, neat, measured, every letter sitting perfectly on the line like it had been placed there with a ruler and a level. Controlled the way Mama's writing never was. Careful the way you're careful when you're hiding something. I recognized it immediately. Not because I'm a handwriting expert, because I'd seen this exact script on birthday cards, on thank you notes, on the lid of a Tupperware container in black Sharpie, capital D with the little flourish on the tail. Darcy's handwriting, 14 pages, front and back, written in blue and black ink, alternating colors like she'd used different pens on different days, which meant she'd come back to this notebook more than once. She'd sat down, opened it from the back, and added to it. Over days, over weeks, patiently, methodically. The way you plan a project at work, the way you build a campaign, the way a social media manager builds a content calendar, except the content was my destruction and the calendar was my life. The first entry was dated 5 months before the night Hank put me through the screen door. Tell Dad about W's savings account. She's been putting away money while he covers the mortgage alone. $5,200. Use this. My stomach turned over. Not the metaphorical kind, the actual kind, where your body decides before your brain does that something is very wrong and starts preparing to reject whatever you just consumed. Coffee and clay dust and the faint taste of bile. Nobody knew about that savings account. I'd opened it at a credit union on Patton Avenue. I put in a little every month, 50 here, 75 there, scraping it together from what was left after bills and groceries and gas for a car that was actively trying to retire. It was my safety net, my emergency fund, my proof that I was trying to build something even while everything around me was falling apart. 2 people knew about it. Cassie, because Cassie knew everything about my finances since she was the one who drove me to the credit union. And Darcy. I'd told Darcy about it one evening on the front porch, sweet tea and cicadas, and she'd leaned forward and said, "That's smart. You deserve that safety net." She'd squeezed my hand when she said it. I kept reading. Show him the Instagram. Make sure the screenshots look right. Match the dates to the times she was home alone. Instagram. I didn't have an Instagram account. I deleted all my social media 6 months after Mama died because scrolling through other people's happiness while sitting in a dying woman's house felt like drinking salt water when you're already thirsty. I told Darcy that. She'd said she understood completely. Suggest he ask her to sign over the deed. Keep it simple. Quit claim. She'll say it's too soon. He'll push. She'll say no. My breath caught. She'll say no. He'll snap. I read that line 4 times. She'll say no. He'll snap. 5 words. No period between them. Just a dash, like Darcy was writing so fast her pen couldn't keep up with her brain. And I sat there in the dirt, knees pressing into red clay, coffee going cold beside me, and I read it again. She'll say no. He'll snap. She knew. Not suspected. Not worried. Not had a bad feeling. She knew. The way you know the sun comes up in the east, the way you know November in Asheville means fog on the Blue Ridge before 8 in the morning. Darcy Presley knew her father would hit me, and she wrote it down like she was planning a content calendar for the Laurel Boutique Hotel. I turned the page. The next entry was dated 11 days before the night Hank shoved me through the screen door. Darcy's handwriting shifted from blue ink to black. Neater, more deliberate, like she had switched from brainstorming to execution mode. At the top, she wrote, Phase 2, Digital. Underneath that, 3 bullet points. Not messy scribbles. Clean, organized, the kind of formatting you learn when you manage social media for a living. 1. Create Instagram account. Use W's old profile photo from 2021. Username similar to her real one. Add 3 posts minimum. Screenshot everything. 2. Send screenshots to Dad. Tell him she's been posting about the house. Tell him she's trying to sell behind his back. 3. He needs to believe she's a threat. Otherwise, he won't act fast enough. I put the notebook down on the grass. A mockingbird was still going in the magnolia above me, cycling through stolen songs like nothing in the world had changed. I pressed my palms flat against the earth and felt the cool of it, the dampness from last night's rain, and I thought about the frozen peas, the fleece blanket, the lavender latte on Biltmore Avenue, the way Darcy held my hand at Mama's funeral and whispered, I've got you, sis. She created a fake Instagram account, using my face. I picked the notebook back up because I had to. The next page was worse. Darcy had drawn a rough timeline, not a calendar exactly, more like a flowchart, with arrows connecting boxes. The first box said Dad moves out motel, 6 weeks max. An arrow led to W gets comfortable, stops documenting. Another arrow. File quitclaim while she's distracted. Then, if challenged, use Instagram posts as evidence of intent to sell. And at the bottom, circled twice in black ink. End result. House transfers to Dad. Dad signs to me within 12 months. W has no claim. 12 months. That was the shelf life of my existence in Darcy's plan. 12 months from shove to signature, from sister to stranger, from peony bed to pavement. She had mapped out my eviction the way Mama used to map out her garden beds, rows and columns, dates and deadlines. I flipped forward. Page 9 of 14. This one had a phone number in the top right corner. No name beside it, just the number and the note. Todd. Cheap. Doesn't ask questions. Pizza ad guy. I stared at it. Todd Brinkley. The attorney whose face was printed on the Asheville Pizza and Brewing box liner next to a coupon for free garlic knots. The lawyer who filed the counter motion calling me a hostile occupant. Darcy hired him. Not Hank. Hank could barely afford his motel room. Hank was eating vending machine peanuts and calling from blocked numbers. Hank didn't have the organizational capacity to find a lawyer, let alone one who specializes in property disputes. Hank's idea of legal strategy was raising his voice until the other person flinched. Darcy found Todd. Darcy called Todd. Darcy probably paid Todd. And when Todd filed that motion with the phrase verbally abusive and threatening, those were Darcy's words. I recognized the rhythm. She talked like that. Calm, clinical, just professional enough to sound credible while gutting you underneath. I turned to page 11. This one made my stomach fold in half. W's emergency fund, $5,200. Only Cassie knows. Get Cassie comfortable. Invite her to brunch. Mention the fund casually. If C confirms the amount, we have leverage. Cassie. My Cassie. The one with the golden retriever fur on her seats and the French fry crumbs in the cup holders and the rosary hanging from the rearview mirror. The one who drove me to work 7 times when the Subaru decided reverse was optional. Darcy tried to use Cassie as a source. I don't know if she succeeded. I don't know if Cassie ever went to that brunch. I don't know what was said or not said. But I know this. Darcy wrote her name in a playbook, like Cassie was a variable in a spreadsheet, not a person who once held my hair back in the Ingalls Market parking lot when I threw up from stress after Mama's funeral. Page 13, second to last page of Darcy's section. A single paragraph, no bullet points, no arrows, just words in blue ink, slightly slanted, like she wrote it late at night. If this doesn't work, there's still the garden. Dad won't maintain it. W will let it die. Once the property looks neglected, we file for adverse possession or push a sale. Either way, the house moves. She doesn't have the money to fight both a deed challenge and a maintenance dispute. She barely covers groceries. The garden. Mama's peonies. The Sarah Bernhardt doubles and the Festiva Maxima whites with their crimson freckles. The lavender border Mama planted the spring before she got sick. The magnolia she fell in love with the day she saw the house. Darcy factored in the death of the garden. She counted on it. She looked at Mama's flowers and saw a legal strategy. I closed the notebook. I didn't cry. I think I was past crying. My body had used up whatever chemical makes tears sometime around page 6. And now I was just sitting in dirt with a $4 trowel and a cold cup of coffee, and 14 pages of proof that the woman who called me sis had been steering my life into a wall since before the first bruise. The mockingbird was still singing. I put the notebook back inside the fireproof box. I latched it. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter next to the ceramic hummingbird Darcy gave me, and I stood there looking at both objects side by side. A gift and a weapon from the same hands. I called Cassie at 9:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone 3 times before I pressed her name, and the third time it said 9:14. And I thought, this is a reasonable hour to ruin someone's Saturday. She picked up on the second ring. I could hear her dog, Captain, barking at something in the background, probably a squirrel, possibly his own reflection. Cassie said, "Hey, what's up?" And I said, "Can you come over?" And she said, "You okay?" And I said, "Bring wine." She didn't ask what kind. She showed up 40 minutes later with a bottle of Barefoot Moscato, the pink label, the one that tastes like someone dissolved a Jolly Rancher in sparkling water and then apologized for it. She also brought a bag of Hint of Lime Tostitos because Cassie believes that every crisis has a chip equivalent, and lime is her crisis flavor. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in. The fireproof box was in front of me. The notebook was on top of it, closed, green cover facing up. The ceramic hummingbird was still on the windowsill where I had left it, catching the morning light, its little gold wings throwing a tiny reflection onto the wall like it was trying to signal someone. Cassie sat down. She looked at the notebook. She looked at me. She said, "Is that your mama's garden thing?" I said, "Flip to the back." She opened it. She read the first page of Darcy's handwriting and her face didn't change, which scared me more than if she had screamed. Cassie has one of those faces that broadcasts every emotion like a weather radar. When she goes still, it means the storm is too big to show. She read for 11 minutes. I counted because I had nothing else to do except watch her eyes move left to right, and listen to Captain snoring on the porch outside where he had given up on squirrels and surrendered to the sun. When she finished, she closed the notebook. She put both hands flat on the table. She looked at me and said, "She tried to get to me." My chest tightened. The brunch? She invited me to breakfast at Sunny Point. About 2 months ago, I thought it was weird because we're not close. She asked about you, about the house, about whether you had any savings put aside for emergencies. Cassie paused. I told her I didn't know your finances, which was a lie, but something felt off, the way she asked. Too casual, like she'd rehearsed it. I exhaled. I didn't realize I had been holding my breath until my lungs reminded me they existed. You didn't tell her about the 5,000? I didn't tell her anything. I changed the subject to Captain's ear infection, and she lost interest pretty fast. Cassie almost smiled. Nobody wants to hear about dog ears when they're fishing for bank statements. I poured 2 glasses of the Moscato. It was warm because neither of us had thought to refrigerate it, and warm Barefoot Moscato is an experience I wouldn't recommend to anyone who has functioning taste buds. But we drank it anyway, because the wine wasn't the point. I told Cassie everything. The 14 pages, the flowchart, The fake Instagram, Todd Brinkley's number with the note cheap, doesn't ask questions, the adverse possession backup plan, the line about the garden dying, all of it. And Cassie listened the way Cassie always listens, which is completely, with her whole body leaned forward and her eyes locked on yours like you are the only broadcast on every channel. When I finished, she said one word, Anne. She was right. I called Anne Whitfield at 10:47. Anne picked up on the fourth ring, which I later learned was because she was rearranging her amethyst collection by chakra alignment, which is a sentence I never expected to be relevant to a legal matter, but here we are. I told Anne about the notebook. She asked me to photograph every page, front and back, including the cover, including the blank pages, including the pressed lavender petal between pages 6 and 7. She wanted metadata. She wanted context. She wanted the whole story the notebook told, not just Darcy's 14 pages. Then she said 3 things that mattered. First, the timeline in that notebook predates the assault by at least 5 months. That means this wasn't reactive. It was premeditated. Darcy didn't respond to a crisis. She manufactured one. Second, Todd Brinkley's phone number in her handwriting connects Darcy directly to Hank's legal representation. If Todd was hired and paid by Darcy, not Hank, there may be an ethics violation. An attorney can't misrepresent who his actual client is. Third, the fake Instagram account is fraud. Creating a false social media profile using someone else's identity and likeness, then using fabricated screenshots as evidence in a property dispute that crosses from civil into criminal territory. I wrote all 3 points on the back of a Reams Creek nursery receipt because it was the nearest piece of paper. My handwriting looked like a seismograph during a magnitude 4, but the words were legible. Anne asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to invite Darcy over for dinner. There was a pause, a long one. Long enough that I heard wind chimes through Anne's phone, which meant she had walked onto her balcony, which meant she was thinking hard. Why dinner? She asked. Because she brought me zucchini bread 11 times. Because she held frozen peas against my face. Because she sat on my mama's garden stones and told me we were sisters. And I want to sit across from her at my mama's kitchen table and ask her one question. What question? Anne was quiet for another few seconds. Then she said, "Don't record her without consent. North Carolina is a one-party state, so you're legal, but I'd rather you not. Just have the conversation. Let her talk. If she admits anything, write it down after she leaves, word for word, as close as you can remember." I agreed. Cassie, who had been listening to the entire speakerphone call while eating Tostitos with the focus of a surgeon, looked at me when I hung up and said, "You're gonna cook for the woman who tried to steal your house?" I said, "Mama's chicken pot pie." Cassie picked up another chip. "That recipe's in the notebook, isn't it?" It was. Page 4. Mama's handwriting. Chicken pot pie. Use thyme from the garden, not the store kind. Store thyme is a lie. I was going to cook my mother's recipe for the woman who wrote a 14-page plan to take my mother's house. And I was going to serve it at my mother's table, on my mother's plates, in my mother's kitchen, under the roof that Darcy Presley had been scheming to pull out from under me since before the first bruise. Thursday, 6:30. I'd have everything ready by then. Thursday came the way Thursdays do when you're dreading them. Slowly, and then all at once. Like a Subaru that stalls 3 times and then lurches through the intersection on a prayer. I started cooking at 4:15. Mama's recipe said prep time was 45 minutes, but Mama was a faster chopper than me, and Mama didn't have to stop every 6 minutes to breathe into her hands and remind herself that this was the right thing to do. Thyme from the garden, not the store kind. I walked out to the herb bed beside the magnolia and cut 6 sprigs with kitchen scissors. The lavender next to it was starting to come back, tiny green shoots pushing through the woody stems like they had decided, without consulting anyone, that it was time. The peonies were still bare, but the soil was dark and loose from 3 weeks of morning care, and I could see buds forming at the base of the Sarah Bernhardt doubles. Tight, hard, the size of marbles, not ready yet, but coming. I went back inside, diced the chicken, peeled the carrots, cut the celery into half moons the way Mama did, not the way the internet tells you, because Mama said round pieces roll off the spoon and half moons stay put. Made the roux with butter and flour and a patience I did not feel. Rolled the crust from scratch because Mama's note on page 4 said, "Pillsbury is fine for weeknights, but this is a show-up pie." A show-up pie, that's what this was. At 5:50, I set the table. 2 plates. Mama's white ones with the pale blue rim, the set she bought at the Goodwill on Hendersonville Road and acted like she'd found at an estate auction. 2 forks, 2 knives, 2 glasses of sweet tea because I didn't want alcohol clouding anything. The fireproof box was in the bedroom closet. The notebook was inside it. The photographs were backed up to my cloud, to Cassie's email, and to a USB drive that Ann Whitfield was keeping in her office between the amethyst cluster and the potted fern. At 6:28, I heard the Kia Sorento pull into the driveway. The cracked windshield caught the porch light and split it into 2 crooked lines. A door closed, footsteps on the gravel. Then 3 knocks, light, almost musical, the way Darcy always knocked, like she was tapping out the first notes of a song only she could hear. I opened the door. She was holding a Tupperware container. I already knew what was inside. Zucchini bread, brown butter, lemon zest, Sharpie on the lid, for my sis, D. She smiled. It was a good smile. Warm, crinkled at the corners, full of the kind of softness that makes you want to believe in people even when you're holding 14 pages of evidence that you shouldn't. "Something smells incredible," she said. "Mama's chicken pot pie." Her smile flickered, just for a half second, a tiny disruption, like a candle in a draft. Then it came back, steadier, wider. She'd love that. We sat down. I served the pot pie. Golden crust, steam curling from the slit I'd cut in the top, thyme and butter and roasted chicken, filling the kitchen with the smell of every Thursday night Mama ever cooked. Darcy took a bite and closed her eyes and said, "Oh my God, Wren, this is exactly how she made it." It was. Because I followed the recipe. Her recipe. From the notebook. The same notebook that held Darcy's 14 pages. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. The weather turning warm. A wedding at the Laurel that went sideways when the groom's mother wore white. Captain's latest vet visit. The new coffee shop on Haywood Road that charged $7 for oat milk and Audacity. Normal things. Safe things. The kind of conversation 2 women have when one of them isn't hiding a 14-page blueprint for betrayal. I let her finish her second serving. I let her wipe her mouth with the paper towel I'd folded beside her plate because I don't own cloth napkins, and Mama never did either. I let the moment sit, full and warm and quiet. The way the kitchen used to feel when Mama was alive and the world outside the magnolia tree didn't matter. Then I said, "I found the notebook, Darcy." She put down her fork. Not fast, not slow, just a measured, deliberate placement, tines down, at a slight angle on the plate. The way you set something down when your hands need a task while your brain catches up. "What notebook?" "Mama's garden notebook. The green one. The one you wrote in." Her eyes moved to the windowsill, to the ceramic hummingbird, its gold wings still catching kitchen light. She looked at it for 3 full seconds, and in those 3 seconds I watched something shift behind her face. Not panic, not guilt, something colder. A recalculation. "I don't know what you're talking about." Page 1. "Tell Dad about W's savings. 5,200. Use this." Page 5. "Create Instagram account. Use W's old profile photo from 2021. Page 9. "Todd Brinkley's phone number. Cheap. Doesn't ask questions." Darcy's jaw tightened. The softness around her eyes flattened like someone had ironed it out. She looked at me, and for the first time in every minute I had ever spent with this woman, I saw her. Not the sister. Not the blanket. Not the frozen peas or the lavender latte or the 12 zucchini breads. I saw the person who had written, "She'll say no. He'll snap," and then brought me comfort food the next morning. "You went through my things," she said. And the fact that she said my things about a notebook that belonged to my dead mother told me everything her denial didn't. It was in Mama's fireproof box, under the magnolia tree, in Mama's garden. Her chair moved back. Not a push, more of a drift, like she was creating distance without admitting she needed it. She pressed her fingertips against the table edge. Her nails were painted sage green, the same shade as the notebook cover, and I don't know if that was a coincidence or the kind of detail that only matters when you're looking for patterns in everything. "You don't understand what he was going to do," she said. Her voice dropped. Not softer exactly. Tighter. Controlled. He was going to sell this house and blow through the money in a year. I was trying to keep it in the family. By forging Mama's signature? I didn't forge anything. By sending your father after me with a quitclaim deed he didn't understand? He understood enough. By planning my eviction 5 months before he ever touched me? She didn't answer that one. She looked down at the plate, at the pot pie crust broken open, time-scented steam long gone, at Mama's blue-rimmed Goodwill plate holding the evidence of a meal cooked with love from a recipe written by a woman whose garden Darcy had planned to let die. Then she looked up. We're not sisters, Wren. We never were. From the driveway, through the open kitchen window, I heard a voice, soft, graveled, unmistakable. Honey, I think that's enough. Opal Hutchins, 71 years old, retired ceramic artist, standing at the edge of the garden stones with her arms crossed and a look on her face that could cure concrete. She had heard everything. Darcy left without the Tupperware. She walked past Opal without looking at her, past the garden stones where she once pressed frozen peas against my face, past the magnolia tree where a green notebook had been buried inside a fireproof box for God knows how long. She got into the Kia Sorento, and the cracked windshield caught the porch light one last time, splitting it into those two crooked lines, and then she reversed out of the driveway and the taillights disappeared down the road toward Tunnel Road, and I never saw her drive that car to my house again. Opal stayed. She walked inside like she owned the hallway, which she didn't, but when you're 71 and you've called 911 for someone and watched their stepfather get handcuffed on your street, you earn a certain territorial privilege. She sat in Darcy's chair. She looked at the half-eaten pot pie on the blue-rimmed plate. She looked at the Tupperware of zucchini bread still sitting on the counter, lid sealed, Sharpie facing up. For my sis, D. How long were you outside? I asked. Long enough to hear her say, you're not sisters. Opal folded her hands on the table. Her fingers were thick from decades of working clay, knuckles wide, nails permanently stained with a ghost of terracotta that no amount of soap could remove. I was watering my ferns. Sound carries past that fence better than you'd think. You heard the notebook part? I heard enough to know that girl had a plan and you weren't in it. I sat down across from her. The kitchen was still warm from the oven. The thyme smell was fading, replaced by something quieter, the way a room smells after a meal is over, and the people who shared it have become different people than they were when it started. Opal didn't ask to see the notebook. She didn't ask what I was going to do. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine, and her palm was rough and dry and warm, and she said, Your mama grew the best peonies on this street. Don't let anyone take that from you either. She left at 8:40. I washed the dishes. Both plates, both forks, both glasses. I dried them and put them back in the cabinet, and I stood in the kitchen alone and listened to the house settle the way old houses do at night, creaking in the joints like they're stretching after a long day. I didn't sleep much, but I wrote. At 11:15, I sat on the couch with the Reams Creek nursery receipt and a pen that worked intermittently, and I wrote down everything Darcy had said, word for word, as close as I could remember, the way Anne had instructed. You went through my things. He was going to sell this house. I was trying to keep it in the family. He understood enough. And the last one, the one that landed like a stone dropped into still water. We're not sisters, Wren. We never were. I emailed the notes to Anne at 11:52. She replied at 6 a.m. with 2 words, got it. The next Monday, Anne filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina State Bar against Todd Brinkley. The complaint alleged that Todd had misrepresented the identity of his actual client, that Darcy Presley, not Hank Presley, had retained and directed his legal services, and that the countermotion filed against me contained claims fabricated using a fraudulent social media account. Anne attached photographs of the notebook pages, the timeline, Todd's phone number in Darcy's handwriting, and the fake Instagram screenshots that Darcy had created using my old profile photo. Todd Brinkley's office responded within 48 hours. He withdrew as Hank's attorney, no statement, no counterfiling. Just a 1-paragraph withdrawal notice that Anne said smelled like a man trying to outrun his own billboard. Without Todd, Hank had no legal representation. The assault charge was still pending. The quitclaim had already been voided. His motel bill at the Mountain IU was approaching 4 figures for the second consecutive month, and his carpentry referrals had dried up like the lavender bed in November. He called me on a Wednesday. Not from a blocked number this time. His own phone, his own voice, smaller than I remembered, quieter. I didn't know about the notebook, Ren. I believed him. Not because Hank deserved belief, but because Hank didn't have the imagination for a 14-page plan. Hank was a carpenter who swung when he was scared and yelled when he was confused and signed things he didn't read because someone he trusted told him to. That someone was his daughter. I know, I said. She told me you were trying to sell the house. I wasn't. She showed me the Instagram. It was fake, Hank. A long pause. The kind of pause where you can hear someone's understanding of the past 18 months rearrange itself like furniture being moved in a dark room. I'm sorry, he said. And then he hung up. I don't know where Hank is now. Last I heard from Cassie, who heard from someone at the hardware store on Merrimon, he was staying with a cousin in Hendersonville. The assault charge resulted in a plea, probation, and a permanent restraining order. His name is still on the house because Mama put it there, and I haven't decided what to do about that yet. Anne says I have options. I'm not in a hurry. Darcy never contacted me again. No text, no call, no zucchini bread, no Tupperware retrieval. I heard she left the Laurel and took a job in Charlotte. I don't look her up. I don't need to. The ceramic hummingbird is still on the kitchen windowsill. I thought about throwing it away. I thought about giving it to Goodwill on Hendersonville Road so it could sit on a shelf next to someone else's blue-rimmed plates and start a new story. But I kept it. Not because it reminds me of Darcy, because it reminds me of what I survived, and some evidence you keep not for the court but for yourself. The notebook is in the fireproof box. The fireproof box is in the closet. The closet is in the house. The house is still mine. And the peonies came back. First week of April. I walked out at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning with my coffee and my $4 trowel, and there they were. Sarah Bernhardt doubles, fat and pink and absurd, blooming along the back fence like they had never left. Like the winter was just a pause, not an ending. Like the roots had been doing their work underground the whole time, in the dark, where nobody could see, waiting for the soil to warm up enough to try again. I stood there for a long time. Then I said, out loud, to no one and to everyone, peonies came back. Mama, so did I. And that's my story. All of it. Every page, every plate, every lie served with brown butter and lemon zest. If you made it this far, I need to ask you something. And I mean it, I really want to know. If the person you trusted most, the one who held your hand, the one who called you family, turned out to be the one pulling every string from the beginning, would you have sat across from her and served her pot pie? Or would you have burned the notebook and walked away? Tell me in the comments. I'll read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. Not for me, for every person sitting in a kitchen right now, holding evidence they wish they'd never found, trying to figure out what to do next. I'll see you in the next one.